Two.
Now, is it correct that if you concluded that the president committed the crime of obstruction, you could not publicly state that in your report or here today?
Can you repeat the question, sir? I don't believe so.
The president?
Well, let me take that back. I would have to look at it, but I'm not certain that that was the case. Well, the finding indicates that the president was not exculpated for the acts that he allegedly committed. We found insufficient evidence of the president's culpability. You're going to have to repeat that for me. I would direct you to the report and adopt what we have in the report. Well, it would be Trump. Can you repeat the last part of that question? Again, I send you the report for where that is stated.
Fusion GPS, is that correct?
And you're on page 103?
103, that's correct, volume 2. When you talk about the firm that produced the Steele reporting, the name of the firm that produced that was Fusion GPS, is that correct?
Well, I'm not familiar with that.
Let me just help you. It was. It's not a trick question. Right? It was Fusion GPS.
Well, I would again refer you to the report and the way it is characterized in the report.
Let me ask you: when did you first learn of Peter Strzok's animus toward Donald Trump?
In the summer of 2017. You
didn't know before he was hired?
I'm sorry? What did
you didn't know before he was hired for your team?
Know what?
Peter Strzok hated Trump.
Okay.
You didn't know that before he was made part of your team. Is that what you're saying?
I did not know that. Well, I can't get into who wrote it, the internal deliberation.
But you signed it.
What I will say is the letter stands for itself. I'm sorry, could you again repeat the question? That would be, I would say as we are going through the three elements of the proof of the obstruction of justice charges, when the fact of the matter is we got. Excuse me, just 1 second. Let me just say, if I might, I don't subscribe necessarily to your the way you analyze that. I'm not saying it's out of the ballpark, but I'm not supportive of that analytical charge.
Is there sufficient evidence to convict President Trump or anyone else with obstruction of justice?
We did not make that calculation. Well, I'm not going to get into the subsidiary details. I just refer you again to page 91, 92 of the report.
You guys, your team wrote in the report, quote, this is the top of page 2, volume 1, also on page 173, by the way. You said that you'd come to the conclusion that, quote, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities, close quote. That's an accurate statement, right?
That's accurate.
And I'm curious, when did you personally come to that conclusion?
Can you remind me which paragraph you're adverting to?
Top of page 2.
On 2?
Volume 1.
Okay. And exactly which paragraph are you looking at on 2?
The investigation did not establish.
Of course. I see it. Yes.
See it?
What was your question?
My question now is, when did you personally reach that conclusion?
Well, we were ongoing for 2 years. I've gone into waters that don't allow me to give you an answer to that particular question. It relates to the internal discussions he would have in terms of indicting an individual. That is in the report, and I rely on what's in the report to indicate what's happened in the paragraphs that we've been discussing. All that, the only thing I want to add is that I'm going through the elements with you does not mean that I subscribe to what you're trying to prove through those elements. I believe I was under consideration for counsel. I had served 2 terms as FBI director.
The answer is no.
I would again dispute your characterization of what occurred in that proceeding. I don't think you reviewed a report that is as thorough, as fair, as consistent as the report that we have in front of us. I would say I rely on what's in the report.
But I'm happy to do it if not.
I have in front of me. Thank you.
Would you like to read it?
I would.
Can you read it out loud to everybody?
I would be happy to have you read it out.
Okay.
There's been a lot of talk today about firing the special counsel and curtailing the investigation. Were you ever fired, Mr. Mueller, from
Was I
special?
what?
Were you ever fired as special counsel, Mr.
Not
Mueller?
that I know.
No. Were you allowed to complete your investigation unencumbered?
Yes.
And in fact, you resigned as special counsel when you closed up the office in late May 2019. Is that correct?
Correct. Well, generally that is the case.
Right.
Although most cases are not done in the context of the president. I'm not going to speak to that. I don't disagree with it necessarily, but I'm not going to speak to any more to that issue. I'm not going to delve more into the details of what happened. If it's in the report, then I'm supportive because it's already been reviewed and appropriately appears in the report.
Statutes, correct?
I'm not going to be involved in a discussion on that at this juncture.
Reading of this provision and applying it to the president's official acts, and I'm concerned about the implications of your theory for over-criminalizing conduct by public officials and private citizens alike. So to emphasize how broad your theory of liability is, I want to ask you about a few examples. On October 11th, 2015, during the FBI investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server, President Obama said, "I don't think it posed a national security problem." And he later said, "I can tell you that this is not a situation in which America's national security was endangered." Assuming for a moment that his comments did influence the investigation, couldn't President Obama be charged under your interpretation with obstruction of justice?
Well, again, I'd refer you to the report, but let me say with Andrew Weissman, who is one of the more talented attorneys that we have and have on board.
Okay, well, I'll take that
over a period of time. He has run a number of units.
I have very limited time.
Sure.
Can you start it again?
Okay.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one? My understanding, I was not applying for the job. I was asked to give my input on what it would take to do the job, which triggered the interview you're talking about.
So you don't recall on May 16th, 2017, that you interviewed with the president regarding the FBI director job?
I interviewed with the president, and
Regarding the FBI director job?
It was about the job and not about me applying for the job.
So your statement here today is that you didn't interview to apply for the FBI director job?
That's correct.
So did you tell the vice president that the FBI director position would be the one job that you would come back for?
You don't recall that one?
You don't recall that?
No.
Okay. Given your 22 months of investigation, tens of millions of dollars spent, and millions of documents reviewed, did you obtain any evidence at all that any American voter changed their vote as a result of Russians' election interference?
I'm not going to speak to that.
You can't speak to that? After 22 months of investigation, there's not any evidence in that document before us that any voter changed their vote because of their interference, and I'm asking you based on all the documents that you reviewed.
That was outside our purview.
Russian meddling was outside your purview?
But the impact of that meddling was undertaken by other agencies.
Okay. You stated in your opening statement that you would not get into the details of the Steele dossier. However, multiple times in Volume 2 on page 23, 27, and 28, you mentioned the unverified allegations. How long did it take you to reach the conclusion that it was unverified?
I'm not going to speak to that.
It's actually in your report multiple times that it's unverified, and you're telling me that you're not willing to tell us how you came to the conclusion that it was unverified.
True.
When did you become aware that the unverified Steele dossier was included in the FISA application to spy on Carter Page?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
When did you become aware that the unverified Steele dossier was included in the FISA application to spy on Carter Page?
I'm not going to speak to that.
Your team interviewed Christopher Steele, is that correct?
Not going to get into that.
You can't tell this committee as to whether or not you interviewed Christopher Steele in a 22-month investigation with 18 lawyers.
As I said at the outset, that is one of the investigations that is being handled by others in the Department of Justice.
Yeah, but you're here testifying about this investigation today. And I am asking you directly, did any members of your team or did you interview Christopher Steele in the course of your investigation?
And I am not going to answer that question, sir.
I don't understand how, if you interviewed an individual on the purview of this investigation that you're testifying to us today, that you've closed that investigation, how that's not within your purview to tell us about that investigation and who you interviewed.
I have nothing to add.
Okay, well, I can guarantee that the American people want to know, and I'm very hopeful and glad that AG Barr is looking into this and the Inspector General is looking into this, because you're unwilling to answer the questions of the American people as it relates to the very basis of this investigation into the president and the very basis of this individual who you did interview. You're just refusing to answer those questions. Can't the president fire the FBI director at any time without reason under Article 1 of the Constitution?
Yes.
Article 2?
Yes.
That's correct. Can't he also fire you as special counsel at any time without any reason?
I believe that to be the case.
Under Article 2?
Hold on just a second. You said without any reason. I know that special counsel can be fired, but I'm not certain it extends to for whatever reason is given.
Well, and you've testified that you weren't fired. You were able to complete your investigation in full. Is that correct?
I'm not going to add to what I've stated before. Yes, ma'am, but I see you're quoting from the indictment, and even though the indictment is a public document, I feel uncomfortable discussing anything having to do with the Stone prosecution.
How many people on your staff did you fire during the course of the investigation?
How many people
did you fire?
I'm not going to discuss that. I don't have it in front of me. I take your word. Okay.
Correct?
Let me just check one thing. Yes.
The report does not recommend impeachment, does it?
I'm not going to talk about recommendations.
It does not conclude that impeachment would be appropriate here,
I'm not going to talk about that issue.
That's one of the many things you wouldn't talk about today, but I think we can all draw our own conclusions.
Which senator?
Which president?
Oh, which president? I think that was President Bush.
According to my notes, it was President Ronald Reagan had the honor to do so. Under whose
My mistake.
Good morning, Director Mueller. Madeline Dean.
Gotcha, sorry. And I have to say that the letter itself speaks for itself. I can't answer that question in the vacuum.
End quote. For the non-lawyers in the room, what did you mean by, quote, potentially preempt constitutional processes?
I'm not going to try to explain that.